morning, everyone. I am Katie Doherty, the President and CEO of the Kennebec Valley Chamber, and thank you for joining us for our weekly Chamber Connect, sponsored by Central Maine Power. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention this presentation will be recorded and we will email it out to you later this afternoon. Please put any questions that you might have in the chat box and we will have time for them in the end. Today's webinar, we are joined by Steve Hewins, the President and CEO of HospitalityMaine. Steve is a graduate of the University of Maine. He founded Hewins Travel out of his apartment shortly after college and built it to the largest travel agency in Maine, with 11 locations and 8 employees. He sold the business to AAA New England in early 2007 and became the Auto Club's VP for branch operations. Steve left AAA in 2013 to become the executive director of Portland Downtown District. He then became president of both the Maine Restaurant Association and the Maine Innkeepers Association in 2016. Facilitating a merger in 2018, which became the present organization, HospitalityMaine. Steve and his wife, Kathy, are now empty nesters living in Falmouth. Thank you, Steve, for taking the time this morning to join us through this challenging time affecting the hospitality industry, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Everybody can hear me okay, I hope. Thank you for coming on board. Yeah, where to start? I mean, it's been quite an experience. You know, as Katie mentioned, it was just about 2 years ago that we merged the two associations together to become HospitalityMaine. It was a move where we were originally two separate organizations with two separate boards, two separate sets of bylaws, funding, everything, bank accounts. The whole thing was separate, even though me and the staff were running both. We were both employees of each. It was kind of an interesting couple of years. And we put the whole thing together. We purposefully chose the name HospitalityMaine essentially to delineate from what the two organizations were previously, because there is a synergy between restaurants and hotels that for many years was thought to be happening, but really wasn't. The issues are still different between restaurants and hotels, but as the industry itself has matured in Maine, there's a symbiotic relationship between the two. I mean, restaurants benefit by hotels and vice versa, especially in tourist destinations or major cities like Portland. And the name HospitalityMaine doesn't denote like the Restaurant and Hotel Association or some generic name like there are in other states. What it denotes is a sector of the economy. And that's really been my key element going forward. It's the guiding principle behind the organization is that we have 1,300 members across the state. Restaurants from individual diners or small seasonal restaurants on the coast and up in the inland areas to the largest and 5-star dining across the state in Portland and places like that. And same thing with the hotel sector. It's inns that might have 3 rooms on up to the biggest hotels in the state and everything in between. National brands, independent properties. It's an amalgamation of an industry that is very diverse. And we don't have holistic views of anything either. I mean, the spectrum of decision-making is amazing to me. We have a big board. We have 2 boards, actually. I should give you a little structure. We have the HospitalityMaine Association is about 25 board members. And then there's the HospitalityMaine Educational Foundation, which has another 12, a different group. And so, and as I say, the diversity of the industry is reflected in the organization. The positions we take are well considered. We stay within our lane, as I always say, which is hospitality. Try not to blend too far beyond that because of the importance of the industry itself, because we represent non-members as well. And we've become, during this crisis, we've become basically the conduit for to the administration. I'll give you, that's sort of the overview of HospitalityMaine. And of course, any questions you come up with, I'll be happy to answer. So of any nature. So keep that in mind as I go forward. So the organization is positioned to represent a sector of the economy. A couple of years ago, actually, it was 2 years ago, but more recently, last fall, I asked the University of Maine to conduct a study to identify what the hospitality industry is in Maine. It was a seminal first attempt to really define the sector in a real way. And professors Andy Crowley and Todd Gabe from UMaine's economic department, which is, as Katie pointed out, it's my alma mater. I actually sit on the Alumni Association board as well. So I'm well connected at UMaine Orono. And So I asked them to do the study, which they did, and they identified the industry for the first time. And if you look at restaurants and hotels and all the businesses that support and are supported by restaurants and hotels, it's about a $7.5 billion industry, with 1 in 10 employees in the state are employed in hospitality. This does not include tourism, which is a wider sector that includes retail, attractions, and things like that. This is strictly hospitality. And the generation of taxes to the state is about 650 million in annual lodging and sales tax receipts from meals and lodging meals and lodging. Sorry about that. Talking through 3 cups of coffee here, so I might be moving a little swiftly. I'll try to slow down. So we define the industry, represent the sector. 3 months ago, as we all know, we were faced with the cliff, basically. I will say through February of this year, hospitality industry is tracking for its 14th straight record year of growth. We were 10% year over year up through February from the record year of 2019, which follows every record year since 2009. And then March hit the cliff and we dropped as the governor began to shut down the economy. Much of it started in our industry, restaurants, hotels, then meetings, events. That continued obviously into April. I've been in my office in Augusta. I live in Falmouth. I've been in my office in Augusta twice since March 15th. We operate remotely. There's 6 of us in HospitalityMaine. As the economy began to shut down, I think there was widespread support for the governor's actions. We were looking at the pandemic, and we knew we had to shut things down. We had to stop the spread. All of us believed at that time that this would have been a sort of maybe a 6-week kind of thing or something. If you recall yourself back then, you might have thought that as well. So we were hoping for, to begin to restart. By mid-April, I was asked by the administration to create a phased-in program for restaurants and hotels, a plan. So I did that. We did it, I said collectively with HospitalityMaine. I guess I wrote it, but it went through about 8 alliterations through our board. We researched, information from the National Restaurant Association, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, and researched ways to operate safely and reopen. And we came up with a very aggressive plan that was not going to be easy to operate by any restaurant or hotel, regardless of size. It's a serious document because we understand the importance of safety, not only to our employees, but to draw visitors back. I mean, in the new world we're facing, people aren't going to travel unless they feel safe. And we know that in the industry. And most of all of our members, I would say, understand that now. So we wrote the plan. It went to the governor. We didn't hear anything back for a few weeks. And then finally, we got the first governor's checklist, which you recall, the restaurant checklist came out toward the early part of May. And I was pleased to a point that much of what we wrote was in it. It had gone through the CDC, so they had added some other factors. But by and large, it was pretty much what we had put forth, which we were comfortable with doing. It involved a 4-phased approach, just like the governor asked for, where we stepped up and opened up more of the industry as the period of time went by. We did not put in dates because we were asked not to put in dates. So we left that out there. We started, operating that way, or planning to operate, waiting for the governor to authorize the ability to reopen restaurants first. We built the lodging at the same time, the checklist for lodging. That came out later, about a couple weeks later. And then the first discussions of quarantines came up. This was not part of any discussion at that point. We did not include that in the plan. Our plan was open in phases, starting like we do with restaurants, 6-foot distances, 33% occupancy. Roughly, when you do that, it falls in different based on the shape of the restaurant, but by and large, 30% occupancy. Same thing with hotels and inns. We proposed a 50% occupancy, book every other room. That was what we proposed as a phase-in. Well, what ended up coming back was the idea of quarantines, a 14-day quarantine. So none of us had seen that before. I don't think that was widely in the country. For restaurants, it was more about, when they could open. And people have been wanting to open for a long time. And of course, then the governor came out with what they called the rural plan. I guess it was a name, but that presumes that 13 counties are all rural, which they aren't. And nonetheless, it came out in 13 counties that they could open first. And then they opened for outside dining, which was in our plan, by the way, because I researched that through the NRA, National Restaurant Association, the other NRA. We knew that outdoor dining was going to be safer, and we put that in the plan initially. It was part of the basic operational proposal. So we were pleased the governor opened up that. We were really surprised they opened up those 13 counties first, because again, that was never discussed. That was sprung later by, I guess, the CDC. So we opened, in the 13 counties. I don't have the exact date off the top of my head, but it was in May, and then we were ready to open in the southern 3 counties June 1. That was the plan, and then we were surprised, as was everybody, 4 days before that when the governor pulled back and said, no, we're going to remain outdoor dining. Now, keeping in mind that not everybody can perform outdoor dining. I mean, I skipped the whole step about takeout and delivery and that sort of thing. That has worked out fairly well for a lot of places. But the outdoor dining was a key factor for the southern part of the state, and also for other places that had never done this before. But many don't even have the room for this. They just physically are not in a place where they could do outdoor dining, so they were shut out. So in southern Maine, the uproar was huge about the pullback, because many of these restaurants had already ordered all their supplies, fresh food, that type of thing. They had called people back from employment, and then with just a few days in advance, they had to pull it back. And believe me, the uproar was significant, not only through us, but directly to the administration. And also, as you probably have seen, it has generated lawsuits. And there are multiple lawsuits now against the action of the governor for varieties of reasons. And I don't really want to go into those details. We're not party to any of those, but we certainly know what's going on. And it's born out of frustration and, frankly, fear of losing everything. Maybe not their health that way, but their economic situation, their livelihoods at that kind of risk. So today, with restaurants, we sit with 13 counties open for inside and outside to the restrictions that we first proposed. So that's still out there. The governor refers to this as phase 2. In southern Maine, we still have a no start date for indoor dining, and we have outdoor availability, but there's no end date to this. So people sit there in limbo. So with regard to hotels, to give you that perspective, hotels have been operating. They've had the ability to operate since the beginning. Many have been hosting essential workers. The governor did expand what the definition of that. So that included a lot of construction people that are here in the state working, for CMP or for construction projects that are underway. But there are a lot of people staying in hotels that are COVID positive, that were moved out of facilities where there wasn't room. That happened early on. There's less of that now, but early on that was a thing. So was homeless shelters that were overrun. We moved them into many hotels. I shouldn't say many, several hotels, at least in the Portland area I'm aware about, took all those people on. You'll note there hasn't been a single case of COVID infections in any hotel in Maine since this started. There has been no incidences of COVID infections in restaurants that I'm aware of. That's important because we built around those checklists. We reached out to Eastern Maine Community College about creating a training programs, which is what I wrote initially to the governor when we initiated our plan in April. We said we will create education programs to ensure that the industry operates safely around your plan that you leased to us, which is exactly what we did. So we went to Eastern Maine Community College. They said, wow, this is a great opportunity to use our electronic badging program. And in total collaboration with them, we built what we called the COVID-19 Restaurant Readiness Program, launched that a little bit after Memorial Day. We've had, I think, about 2,000 hospitality workers go through that program and pass it, because you don't just go through it, you're tested at the end. And you need to score 80% or better in order to earn the electronic badge, which is a credential of value. And the community colleges have a strategy to build on that to toward degree programs, which I could go into, but I won't now. But it's quite interesting, actually. We just launched the lodging readiness program yesterday, and we held that. We had it written, but we were waiting for our hopes that the governor would open up the economy more than what happened yesterday, Monday, which I'll explain a bit. Unfortunately, we didn't get what we wanted, but we had to get this program out there. So we launched it, and we're already getting a ton of hotel people taking the class. And that's really the strategy, is to operate safely and operate really at industry leading safety levels. And I'm serious about that. We want Maine to be a national leader in this. But the problem is we're stuck, because we were, last week, the DECD sent to us their plan for the replacement, the alternative to the quarantine. They have a 3-part plan, which was announced on Monday, but we saw it last Wednesday. The 3 parts, parts 2 and 3 involve really more local monitoring and education to allow communities to, help educate visitors and the public and operations and that sort of thing. Section 2 is really about day trippers and how to handle people coming in the state just to visit for the day. And that mostly is the southern part of the state for obvious reasons, because, the traveling distance is further north. You need to stay in hotels, but it's primarily designed for that. But part 1 is the key thing, which is the replacement for the quarantine. And what they offered was a testing protocol. Now, this testing concept we have been talking about for a month. I knew this was under consideration. We had been communicating back and forth about the practicality of that. And when they released the plan last week, we circulated it amongst our membership. I don't know if anybody on the call here might have gotten that from us. I'm trying to look around at names, but we have a pretty big list that we send a daily briefing out to every single day. We've done it since March 1. And so the feedback, I asked for feedback, and it made no consideration about whether we agree with it or not. I just said, listen, we need to provide information back to the administration. They want it in 24 hours, basically less than that. They want it by noon the next day that I got it. So it was really less than 24 hours. I got that night 125 responses almost immediately that were incredibly detailed. I mean, there were a few people saying, we got to open tomorrow, at all costs, So we knew we'd see some of that. We saw a few other people that no, we got to stay safe. We can't do this. Very few of those. And I'm talking like a handful, not even that, couple. But mostly what we got were people that were talking about the economic devastation that they faced in real terms. And I've got some stuff that I was just reading it. I just couldn't even believe it. The reduction in business isn't like, 50% or a third. It's like 5%. That's what's 95% down. I mean, even more for some places, and so I can read you some of what was said. And I sent that to the governor, a small sampling. Remember, I got 125 responses. Not a single person believed the testing model replacing the quarantine was something that they thought would work. 100%. So I reported back to the governor, and then Monday when she announced her thing, it was exactly what we saw last week. Despite the working with industry, the comments about collaborating, this and that, no. It was literally what I had seen. And so we were very disappointed. I think the problem, everybody has tough decisions to make. The governor has the toughest of all, okay? We all know this, but that's what the position's about. You get to a point in time where the health cost and the economic cost merge. And that's where we're at right now. We're at a point now where we've come to a convergence where the two elements are of equal significance. But we're not really thinking enough about the economic aspects and what's going to be left behind. And I think that's where I'm going to leave a lot of my presentation here today was with, and I'll welcome questions, of course. I think we need to have a better strategy for maintaining this industry and rehabilitating it. For many people we know, they're living day to day. It's hard to look past this. We understand that. But if the industry is going to succeed presently, but also in the long term, we have to have operations that are safe. That's what people are going to look for. If we don't have the opportunity to do that at the most acute moment that we're at right now, we're going to lose a lot of people before they even have the opportunity. We lost a lot of restaurants and hotels already. You don't see press releases about people shutting down for good. Sometimes you see things on Facebook, but trust me, there are a lot of people that are leaving. They're just giving up. They just don't have the money. They don't want to lose all their life savings, or they can see it in front of them, or they simply don't want to operate under the restrictions that are being placed on them. And we understand that. But at some point, we've got to give people hope too, with the idea that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a way to bring things back. And until we have the opportunity to reopen, ultimately fully, but not even that, just in phases, then we have this despair that exists out there. And it's not a positive feeling, frankly. And, you know, I guess we look to leadership to help get people in that mode. We haven't really had that yet. The daily press conferences, if you ever watch them, are frankly dismal. You know, serious stuff, no doubt, but not like motivating or energizing people. So it's at a really low point right now. So the opportunity to present to you folks today comes at a time of great urgency and decision-making that needs to be carefully thought. The reason why the testing plan is bad is I can give you multiple examples, but I'll give you one that's pretty straight up. We called CVS's in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York State yesterday and asked to get a test because we were going on vacation to Maine. There was not a single CVS that would give a test for that. The online way to do it says, sorry, you don't qualify for a test at this time. Please see your primary care physician. That was the response. If you call a CVS, they tell you, we don't do tests for that. You need to show symptoms or you have to have a prescription. I mean, so the proposal from the state is to do this. Well, we don't control other states. And as we all know, we've just barely got enough capacity in Maine to serve residents. Why do we believe that other states are not in the same position as Maine? I think it's the same in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, all the places that we traditionally draw visitors from. So it's the impracticality, or I see the lack of testing. And then there's the ethical question is, should we be taking testing away from people that are sick in other places? I mean, there's that. And then there's the questions around whether anybody would even go about doing that, because a test is $150 basically. And if you've got a family coming up to Maine, are they going to want to spend that kind of money to come to Maine? No, they'll go to Cape Cod where they don't have to take a test, or somewhere else. So, you know, there are so many reasons why this doesn't solve the quarantine. And, you know, so maybe people had an initial reaction. This was a step forward. For us in the industry, it's a step to nowhere. It's basically the same place. And so just so you know, we offered an alternative. We didn't just say, oh, we can't do that, you know, come up with something else. No, we went and straight up gave a proposal last week, which was basically to do what New Hampshire and Vermont are doing. I mean, apparently the governor has spoken a lot about working with the governors of New Hampshire and Vermont and crafting the strategies, but they're doing things quite a bit different in both of those states. Believe me, we know minutia about what's going on there. I've talked to my counterparts there that do what I do. And what New Hampshire has done, and now Vermont, is they have what's called a certificate of compliance. And basically people come and they sign a document that says they're safe and they've quarantined or something to that effect, the details of which I could share. I mean, it's basically what we proposed that Maine do. And of course that was not what we do. So with that, I have downloaded a lot of detail to you guys this morning, but you know, it's the state of play as it stands right now. And there are far, far more details I could share. And there's a lot more. There's folks on this call as I look around that are quite aware of this as well. So I guess, Katie, I would probably leave it at that point now and suggest if anybody has any thoughts, questions, of course, suggestions, ideas.
Yeah, so we do have a couple questions in the chat box. So we have one from Scott from Maple Hill. So hospitality world, yes. Thanks, Steve, for your time today. My question is, why is the lodging industry being singled out for enforcement by requiring our guests to sign certifications regarding testing upon their arrival? The exposure for guests staying in their own rooms would be less than going to restaurants and other or retail stores, but only lodging places are required to get testing certifications. Yeah.
Well, Scott understands what he's saying, and I agree with everything he just said. We're talking about turning, frontline desk clerks, entry-level type positions in many places into police people, essentially. And why? As Scott points out, and I did earlier, the safety in hotels is now widely known across the U.S. It's not like a novel idea, and I think that it becomes that type of a question. Why is that? Well, it's because that's where visitors are going. But as I said earlier, the southern border is a sieve. It's Swiss cheese down there. There are people entering this state left and right now that aren't quarantined, that aren't signing any documents. They're going to, wherever they can eat and go to the beaches and all that. It's happening. It's uncontrollable. And yet the hospitality lodging industry is going to be asked to document people staying overnight. I don't have the good answer to that question. I think it's it's something we wonder ourselves. But unfortunately, lodging properties are the entry point for a lot of people to overnight. And that's where the state is pushing their initiative. But it's just, and again, there are some facilities that are really capable of doing this, big properties that have a lot of employees, even though they don't have many of them working. But I worry a lot about the smaller properties trying to execute with HIPAA laws that are questionable. I mean, there's that. We haven't even talked about the legal problems with this. I mean, that's what basing a lot of lawsuits. There is questions of healthcare, privacy. There's questions of First Amendment rights and interstate commerce questions. Believe me, they're all going to come out at some point. Not a good answer, Scott, but I mean, I'm hearing you. Sorry.
Another question that got sent to me was yesterday it was released that the Prime Minister of Canada and US are extending the border closure until late July. What are your thoughts on that with the hospitality industry impact?
The way I would answer that is we all know that Canadian tourists are critical to the culture here, and that's a huge loss. It wasn't completely unexpected, but still, what Maine is, just so think about this for a second. Maine is essentially an island, right? I mean, we had a closed Canadian border on 2.5 sides. We got the Atlantic Ocean, and then we're the only state in America that borders on only one other state. Fun fact, New Hampshire is our entry point. And then New Hampshire has more liberal, I said liberal is the wrong word, more advanced movement toward opening their economy. Yet they also, half their employees work in Massachusetts, supposedly a hot zone. I could talk to you about hot zones too, because that's somewhat of a misnomer now. So it just adds one more layer of the urgency. Katie, I don't, not much more I could add to that other than what we all know to be true.
Yeah. Another question from Alec Rogers, who owns the Quality Inn and Maine Evergreen Suites Hotel. Thanks for giving us your time today, Steve, and for serving the industry, Do you have some comparative information of COVID mitigation policies in tourism states who may be well underway in their season and how effective their policies have been, both economically and in terms of COVID stats?
Right, Alec, good question. The publicity is often around places like Georgia and Florida, California, places that have opened up significantly. And the media tends to pick up on negative news around that. but it's really, the numbers are not what you might read. They're actually trending well in places like that. But what I always try to look at are states that are more similar to Maine, places that are of a similar size and sort of like makeup of Maine, places like Idaho, Utah, places out west, other states like our New England states, obviously as well. And what I'm seeing, it's still early data, but Idaho is a good example because it's very similar to Maine in terms of the way it's set up as a state. They have opened up the state pretty much wide, and I don't think that their numbers at all. I wish I had stats on that. If I would prepared for the meeting on a question like that, I would give it to you. But we've tried to model a lot of what we did early on about those kind of places, Idaho, Arkansas, Utah, and others. I looked at those plans, and I think they're achieving success. So some of the things that, it's been hard to argue the public health aspect for obvious reasons. We want to keep everybody safe. You can't argue in a way effectively against the state CDC. But more recently, there is scientific data now speaking to things like quarantines and testing, and not in a way that it's keeping people safer. I think you're going to see more information about that coming out very soon, and very soon here in Maine. But I will leave it at that point, I guess.
Paul from PFT, who serves a lot of restaurants and hospitality industries, with her food. Do you know how the governor plans to enforce her new policy of testing?
Well, one thing to keep in mind, by the way, the testing hasn't really launched yet. The first answer is no, we don't. The questions are coming in like crazy. As I was hopping through this entire 3 months, the governor, or the administration, I should say, makes a statement, and then we're left with trying to interpret what that was said, because there's no detail behind it. It'll come out in a press conference, it'll be in a press release or something, and then we're an industry of very innovative people, right? They think about stuff like this. So all of a sudden they bring up all the exceptions, and how do we handle this? And how do we handle that? Sometimes we can interpret ourselves. Sometimes we have to go to the state and say, we need an answer for this. The governor made a sort of an offhanded comment the other day about potentially throwing people in jail if they don't follow what she's put out there, which would be unbelievable. But the reality is that they don't have the mechanism for enforcement. They don't really have staff to do that. I don't think they're going to get local public officials to do that. We do have the health inspection program across the states. We have health inspectors. They can go around. But, it's always going to be we've got 4,500 restaurants in the state and over 1,000 hotels. And we got about, a few dozen inspectors. So I think the enforcement becomes a real question. And if it's selective, that's not going to fly very well either. So the answer is I don't know, and we're waiting for some definitive answers on that point.
I don't think anybody at the front desk of any hotels would really want to be the enforcer on that rule. That's a hard one.
Yeah, totally.
Another question is, do you hold any optimism for, hold on. Sorry, another question popped in, so it moved. Do you hold any optimism for a broader reopening to out-of-state tourism this summer, or is the present plan what we're living for this season?
That's getting asked a lot from people lately. It's partly driven by the depression of what they hear from the state. Keeping in mind that we're in what's called phase 2 of their plan, which in theory, phase 3 is supposed to start July 1. Actually, we're pushing earlier, by the way. We're trying to get a reopening plan to start for the last week of June, because that's a big week in Maine from the numbers in lodging. It's significant. And so we're hopeful that we might get the last week of June involved. But the question about saving the season, phase 3 is the next phase. I know what I wrote, what we submitted, and yes, we would be open. We would be open not to meetings though, and weddings and things like that. So that's phase 4. there was a lot of discussion over whether that would start sooner than later. And believe me, there's a lot of heavy lobbying around that, especially from the wedding and the catering groups. So can I'm an optimistic person by nature. I think of good things most first anyhow. But I'm not the person making the calls, So what I mentioned earlier is we have more arrows in the quiver yet to deploy, and we're getting ready to do that. So once we begin to focus hard on the economic aspects of this, which we have, but not to the degree we're going to, my hope is that the conveying that in hard terms that we're going to do will move the administration to acquiesce and allow the opportunity for the industry to, to execute the plan. Will people come here though? That's another question entirely. Will visitors see that? That's why I said earlier that we need to lead the nation in this type of operation, because that's where the sweet spot for Maine is going to be. It's always been this way in Maine. I'm a history major from Maine. I know Maine history. And we are the start of Maine history in the 1800s. And people came here for the same things they come today for: clean air, clean water, fresh food, sea, land. They came in the 1800s for the same thing. We can contemporize that and lead. That's my optimistic view, right? I don't make those calls. So we need to get started and prove it. So that's what I'm looking to do.
Another question that came in to me is, what are your thoughts on the phase 3 being both July and August? Do you think that hopefully August will get opened up sooner, or do you think phase 3 will just stay July?
Yeah. What's happened on this, to that question? Remember I said earlier, I was asked not to put dates in when we wrote our thing. It was a phase plan that would be on the ground determining dates. And then immediately the governor came out with dates. And we were like, what? The arbitrary dates, literally arbitrary. July 1. What is July 1 different from June 22 or July 15? There is no metric that determines a date. So you'll notice what happened as they rolled this out and they opened up hotels. You might recall earlier, they didn't put any end dates. So there is no end date. They did talk July and August for phase 3. That was the early thing, but they removed those dates at our insistence because people book in advance. You know the industry if you're in it. People are booking the fall now. They're booking next year now. But if you said this plan was only good for July and August, that means you couldn't take reservations beyond August. Literally, that was the way it was written. And there was nothing. The industry was off the cliff after August 31. And so we told them this, and they then adjusted it. And then it was like, okay, we're going to begin July 1, and it's forever. So there's no cutoff to that. Now, having said that, that's not helpful. I mean, obviously, we expect to reopen more as we go forward. And there's a lot of hope that things will become more open for the fall, let's say Labor Day and beyond. Again, I don't call the shots. I don't wave the wands, but I would say that when mothers of the bride call me up, I mean, I get these calls. They find my email, and next thing I know, I've got a woman telling me, I've got my daughter getting married in September. We want to have the wedding. Can we do it? I mean, I try to tell them, give them hope. I say, don't cancel anything because we don't know yet. And I think a lot of the hotels are relaxing their penalties or anything like that in order to keep that opportunity out there. So I would say that, we're going to open more of the economy, more of the hospitality economy. And when that occurs, I'm not sure, but we're working to accelerate that. That's, I guess, the only way I could answer that.
Yeah, I agree with that. It is strange that, phase 3, July and August is 50 people max for events. And then all of a sudden in September, you can just do whatever. So it's hard that there's no other gradual increase in that kind of stuff. Another question is, thank you for your time today. I am from the Finance Authority of Maine. Can you comment if the lending gap or need from the hospitality community that are currently not being met?
Yeah. Well, at this stage of our discussion, I don't want to bore everybody too much with the funding models, although in fame they would not be bored by this, trust me. But from the standpoint of the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, which was the lifeline for many, many businesses. And frankly, we got to thank Senator Susan Collins for that. She launched it. But when they launched it, they anticipated a shorter duration and that people would not go on unemployment, but it would instead remain employed by being under the program, which paid employees first. The problem was, at the same time, the federal government put in enhanced unemployment insurance, $600 additional every week, which was an inhibitor for bringing people back to work, and it still is. So no disrespect to anybody. I mean, if I was an employee, I'd do that too, because it's a great opportunity to make more money, but not work. But it's counterproductive against the PPP. That's the problem. People are running out of money with that PPP because the initial plan was 8 weeks. Now, I know we're extending it out and there's a lot there, but a lot of people have used up their money. And there's more work in Washington around extending that too, and also other SBA programs that are lending programs. Most of the lending and most of the grant facilities have come out of Washington. I suppose FAME could speak more specifically about the involvement here in Maine, but the banks in Maine have mostly been originating loans that are federally government related, SBA backed and that sort of thing. Whether or not, I don't know FAME's involvement in this, but I will tell you that we're going to need a lot more money. I mean, we're going to have to reclaim and restore this industry. And that's part of our longer term view now. It's like the CARES Act has more money built in. And going forward, we think more of that can be applied to our industry. And we're looking at ways to see that happen. But people don't want to take on more debt. That's one of the biggest problems too, by the way, is there are people that don't want to take on more debt and they will close because they can't do that. They're already leveraged. And these are small businesses that don't have a lot of bank accounts. So, that becomes a problem. Grants are going to be what's needed. Funding that is emergency related. That would be what I'd say, I guess.
So Alec Rogers has another question, and maybe he's throwing on his chair of the chamber board hat with this one. What can we do as individual business owners or corporately as a chamber of commerce or other industry groups to help change the present policy position on testing and quarantine?
Yeah, so that is an excellent question, and it is top of mind right now. I can't go into real detail right now about some plans that we're working on, but one of the things we need to do is to create a bigger coalition. I know there are a lot of chambers working hard to move the governor, and I'm sure KVCC, I'm sure. I do know of other chambers that are equally aggressive down in Penobscot Bay and up in Bar Harbor, Gunquit, Kennebunkport. The voices are, frankly, unfortunately, not really being heard. And we get heard, but as I pointed out today, it's not like we're effectual around this. I think the answer is going to be a broader coalition of business-oriented entities that can speak as a single voice. And I think we've come to a point where we can speak as a single voice. I mean, there's a wide divided opinions, like I said earlier, no doubt, but running associations, as I do, as Katie does, or chairing committees like boards like Alec does, we know what our members are facing. But we need to get more leverage. And so I think what you're going to see, Dana Connors called me just as I was going on, because I've talked to him at length about this, and I will when I get off the call, because we think that we can bring a broader group together and for more effect. So to your point, Alec, I would just say that you're on target, and look for more soon.
So I don't see any other questions in the chat box. Does anybody else have some last minute questions? I don't see anything. So thank you, Steve, for your time this morning. And thank you for all you're doing for the hospitality industry of Maine. Tourism is a huge impact and a lot of money that comes into our economy in the state. And it's important to hear the hospitality side of stuff. So with that, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Please check out our website for any information and resources for your business during this time. Please let us know if the chamber can do anything for you guys. And thank you again to our sponsor for CMP. And hope you guys all have a great day. Thanks.